The impossible patient. The emergency that changed everything. The medical station orbiting Proxima Tertius hung in space like a crystal snowflake, its 47 levels housing the most advanced healthcare facility in the known galaxy. Dr. Vexith had spent 3 centuries perfecting his craft, treating patients from 200 different species. His reputation was flawless, his success rate legendary, and his competence absolute. Until the day they brought him a dying crystalline. "Doctor," his assistant Mora called out, her tentacles writhing with distress. "Emergency transport incoming. It's Ambassador Shimrath's daughter." Vexitha's 4 hearts skipped simultaneously. The crystallines were among the most powerful species in the Galactic Federation, their bodies composed of living diamond that could withstand temperatures hot enough to melt steel and cold enough to freeze hydrogen solid. They were practically indestructible. Practically. When the unbreakable breaks. Princess Lilith materialized on the medical platform, and even Vexitha's centuries of experience couldn't hide his shock. The young crystalline's body, normally blazing with inner light, had gone dark. Fractures spiderwebbed across her torso like lightning frozen in glass. The sound she made was like wind chimes breaking in slow motion. "Dimensional breach exposure," Mora reported, her voice tight with fear. She was caught in a rift collapse during the diplomatic mission to Sector 9. "Her molecular structure is destabilizing." Vexith moved immediately, his specialized instrument scanning the princess. What he saw made his blood run cold. Crystalline physiology was based on perfect molecular alignment. One atom out of place could create a cascade failure. Lilith had millions of atoms out of place. "Stabilization field, maximum intensity," he ordered. "Prepare the quantum realignment chamber." They worked for 6 hours. Every technique Vexith knew, every procedure he'd pioneered, every technology at his disposal. Nothing worked. The princess's light continued to dim, her crystalline structure continuing its inexorable collapse. The unthinkable recommendation. Ambassador Shimrath arrived in the observation gallery, his massive form radiating barely controlled power. When he spoke, his voice made the station's walls hum in sympathy. "Dr. Vexith. Tell me my daughter will survive." Vexith had never failed a patient of this magnitude. He'd never had to deliver this kind of news to someone who could literally shatter planets in grief. But he was also honest to a fault. "Ambassador, I've exhausted every option in my considerable arsenal. Princess Lilith's molecular structure is collapsing faster than I can repair it. At current rates, she has perhaps 48 hours before total structural failure." He paused. "I'm sorry. There's nothing more I can do." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees as the ambassador's form darkened with grief. Around the medical station, security protocols engaged automatically, preparing for the possibility that one of the galaxy's most powerful beings might lose control. "There must be someone," Shimrath said, his voice cracking like breaking stone. "Someone in this entire galaxy who can help her." Mora tentacled through her database with desperate speed. "Doctor, there's one specialist who's dealt with similar molecular destabilization. Dr. Sarah Park, a human geologist on Earth. She published a paper on crystal healing techniques that—" "A human?" Vexith interrupted, incredulous. "Mora, humans are barely past chemical combustion. They still use metal knives for surgery. Their lifespan is measured in decades, not centuries. What could they possibly—" "She saved the keeper crystals of Mars," Mora continued, pulling up the records. 40-year-old geological formations that were fracturing due to terraforming stress. Everyone said it was impossible. She stabilized them using techniques derived from her grandmother's traditional healing practices. Vexith wanted to argue. Humans were fragile, primitive, barely tolerated in the Federation because Earth's location made it strategically useful. But as he looked at Princess Lilith's fading light, he realized he had no other options. "Contact this human," he said quietly. "Offer whatever compensation necessary. But warn her that she'll be working with technology she's never seen, treating a patient whose biology she can't possibly understand, and if she fails, she'll have made an enemy of the crystalline empire. The arrival of Dr. Park. 26 hours later, the transport ship docked at the medical station. Dr. Sarah Park emerged, and Vexitha's first thought was that they'd sent the wrong person. She was elderly by human standards, perhaps 70 Earth years, with silver hair tied back in a practical bun and hands weathered by decades of fieldwork. She wore simple clothes and carried a worn leather bag that looked older than some of his junior staff. "Dr. Vexith?" she asked, her voice carrying an unexpected strength. "I'm Sarah Park. Take me to the patient immediately." "I don't have time for diplomatic pleasantries, and neither does she." Her directness surprised him. Most species approached crystallines with elaborate protocol and ritual. But perhaps humans didn't know any better. He led her to Lilith's chamber. The princess had deteriorated significantly, her light now barely a flicker. Ambassador Shimrath stood vigil, his massive form casting shadows that seemed to hold their own grief. Dr. Park approached without hesitation, setting down her bag and pulling out what looked like primitive magnifying glasses. She spent 5 minutes simply observing, her weathered hands hovering inches above Lilith's fractured surface. She murmured. "Classic cascade fracturing. The molecular bonds are releasing stored energy as they break, which accelerates adjacent breakage. It's exactly like what happened to the Keeper crystals." "Dr. Vexith said carefully. "I've tried quantum realignment, dimensional stabilization, molecular reconstruction." "You've tried to force the structure back into place," Sarah interrupted, still examining Lilith. "That doesn't work with crystals. You can't push them. You have to listen to what they want to do and guide them there gently." Vexitha's medical pride bristled. "Princess Lilith is not a rock formation, Dr. Park. She's a sentient being with one of the most complex physiologies in the known universe." Sarah looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw something he hadn't expected, absolute confidence backed by decades of experience. "Doctor, I've spent 50 years listening to crystals. I learned from my grandmother, who learned from hers, going back generations. We're taught that every crystal has a natural resonance, a frequency at which it wants to exist. You're trying to override that resonance with brute force technology. I'm going to help her find her natural frequency again." She turned to Ambassador Shimrath. "Sir, I'm going to need your permission to try something that's going to seem very strange and possibly very primitive. But if you want your daughter to survive, you're going to have to trust me." The sound that changed everything. What happened next would be discussed in medical journals for centuries. Dr. Park reached into her worn leather bag and pulled out a collection of objects that made every sophisticated physician in the room want to protest: tuning forks of various sizes, small bells, and smooth river stones. "These are diagnostic tools?" Vexith asked, unable to hide his skepticism. "These are listening tools," Sarah corrected. She struck the largest tuning fork against her palm and held it near Lilith's surface. The crystalline princess resonated weakly, producing a dissonant, painful sound. "There," Sarah said quietly. "She's trying to vibrate at her natural frequency, but the fractures are creating interference patterns. It's like she's singing off-key and can't find the right note." She spent the next hour testing different frequencies, making notes in an actual paper notebook with an actual pen. Vexith watched in fascination and horror as this elderly human used tools that would have been primitive 3,000 years ago on any civilized world. Finally, Sarah selected 3 specific tuning forks. "Ambassador Shimrath, I need you to place your hands here and here," she indicated 2 points on Lilith's surface. "When I strike these forks, you're going to feel vibrations. I need you to amplify them. Use your own crystalline structure to resonate with your daughter. You're going to help her remember what her natural frequency feels like." The ambassador, who had stood frozen with grief for hours, moved immediately. His massive hands, each one capable of crushing steel, touched his daughter with infinite gentleness. Sarah struck the first fork. A pure, clear tone rang out. Shimrath gasped as he felt the vibration travel through his own structure. "I feel her," he whispered. "She's responding." Sarah struck the second and third forks in precise sequence, creating a chord that seemed to make the air itself shimmer. She began to hum along with the tones, her human voice surprisingly pure, adding harmonics that the instruments alone couldn't produce. And slowly, incredibly, Princess Lilith's fractures began to align. The chaotic breaks started following natural crystal growth patterns. Her inner light, which had been nearly extinguished, began to glow brighter. "That's it," Sarah encouraged, her voice steady. "Find your song, princess. Remember what it feels like to be whole." The moment of truth. For 3 hours, Sarah Park worked with nothing more than tuning forks, bells, river stones, and her own voice. She taught Ambassador Shimrath to recognize his daughter's natural resonance, to amplify it with his own crystal and structure. She showed Mora how to use the medical station's quantum field generators not to force alignment, but to support the princess's own healing process. Dr. Vexith watched in stunned silence as every principle of modern medicine was gently set aside in favor of something far older and, impossibly, far more effective. When Princess Lilith finally opened her eyes, her light blazing bright and clear, her fractures healed into beautiful patterns that looked like intentional art, the first word she spoke was simple. "Grandmother?" Sarah smiled, tears running down her weathered face. "Not quite, sweetheart. But I learned from mine. Rest now. You've done the hard work." Ambassador Shimrath couldn't speak. He simply placed one massive hand on Sarah's shoulder, and the gesture said everything his voice couldn't. Dr. Vexith approached slowly, his medical scanner showing readings he'd never seen before. Princess Lilith wasn't just healed. Her crystalline structure was stronger than before, the fractures having healed into reinforcement patterns that made her nearly indestructible. "How?" he asked simply. Sarah packed her tuning forks back into her worn bag. "Because you were so focused on the complexity of her biology that you forgot the simplest truth. Some things work the same way whether you're a crystal the size of my fist or a crystalline princess who could hold a star in her hands. Everything has a natural frequency. Everything wants to be whole. You just have to listen." The ripple effect. When old wisdom meets new science. The medical station's conference room had never been so crowded. Word of Princess Lilith's recovery had spread through the Galactic Federation faster than light-speed communications. Physicians from 70 species had requested permission to observe Dr. Sarah Park's techniques. The auditorium they'd been forced to relocate to could hold 3,000 beings, and it was standing room only. Dr. Vexith stood at the podium, his 4 hearts beating with something he hadn't felt in decades: humility. "Distinguished colleagues," he began, his voice carrying across the vast space. 3 days ago, I declared a patient beyond saving. Today, that patient is preparing to return home in better health than before her injury. The physician who achieved this uses tools that most of us would consider museum pieces and techniques that predate faster than light travel. On the display behind him, images showed Sarah's tuning forks, her river stones, her handwritten notes. A wave of skeptical murmurs rippled through the crowd. "I present to you Dr. Sarah Park of Earth, who is going to challenge everything we think we know about medicine. The lesson that shocked the galaxy." Sarah walked to the podium with the same practical stride she'd used crossing a geological survey site. She set her worn leather bag on the presentation table, and several physicians in the front row actually leaned away from it as if it might contain something dangerous. "Thank you all for coming," she said simply. "I'm going to start with a question that might seem strange. How many of you have ever actually touched your patients?" The silence was absolute. Then a Severian doctor raised 3 of her appendages hesitantly. "Dr. Park, we have quantum scanners that can analyze cellular structures without physical contact. Touch is unnecessary and potentially harmful." Sarah said, the same sound she'd made when examining Princess Lilith. "That's what I thought. You've gotten so advanced that you've forgotten the basics." She pulled out one of her tuning forks. "This tool is about 6,000 years old in design. Humans have been using tuning forks since we figured out that sound could be measured and replicated. We use them to tune musical instruments. She struck the fork against the podium, and the pure tone rang out across the auditorium. But my grandmother taught me something that modern science forgot: everything vibrates. Your body vibrates. My body vibrates. That crystal pillar holding up the ceiling vibrates. And when something is sick or injured, its vibration changes. Sarah walked to where Ambassador Shimrath sat with Princess Lilith, who looked radiant and healthy. "May I?" she asked the princess, who nodded eagerly. Sarah placed her hand on Lilith's surface and struck a tuning fork, holding it close. The princess resonated with a clear, beautiful tone that made the entire auditorium hum in sympathy. "That's what health sounds like for a crystalline," Sarah explained. "Now watch." She moved to a demonstration crystal that Vexith had prepared, one with deliberately induced microfractures. When she struck the tuning fork near it, the sound was discordant, painful. That's what injury sounds like. You don't need a quantum scanner to hear that something's wrong. You just need to listen. The challenge to modern medicine. A Zenthari physician stood up, his scales rippling with agitation. "Dr. Park, with all due respect, we have technology that can analyze 1 billion data points per second. How can simple sound compete with that?" Sarah smiled, and there was something fierce in it. "Doctor, let me ask you something. When was the last time you made a diagnosis that surprised you? When was the last time a patient's body told you something your scanners missed?" The doctor's scales went still. After a long pause, he sat down without answering. "Your technology is amazing," Sarah continued, her voice carrying across the silent room. "I could never build a quantum scanner or understand half of what it tells you. But you've become so dependent on your tools that you've stopped trusting your own perception. You've forgotten that medicine isn't just about data. It's about connection." She pulled out her river stones, smooth and ancient. "My grandmother used to take me to the river near our home. She'd have me select stones by feel, not by sight. She'd say, 'Sarah, let your hands remember what your eyes never learned.'" Sarah held up one stone, worn smooth by centuries of water. "She was teaching me to trust my senses, to feel the subtle differences that scanners can't always detect. When I examined Princess Lilith, I didn't just look at her fractures. I felt how the breaks wanted to align. I listened to what her body was trying to do. And then I helped her do it. The demonstration that changed everything." Dr. Vexith stepped forward. "Dr. Park has agreed to demonstrate her techniques. We have 6 patients here, volunteers from different species, each with conditions we've been unable to fully treat using conventional methods. Dr. Park will examine them using only her primitive tools." The first patient was a Metherian, whose gaseous body was contained in a force field. Their physician explained that they suffered from chronic resonance instability, a condition that caused painful vibrations throughout their form. Sarah approached with a set of bells. She rang them at different frequencies near the force field, watching how the Metherian's gases moved in response. After 5 minutes, she selected 3 specific bells and created a pattern of sounds. "Your containment field is oscillating at the wrong frequency," she said simply. "It's causing feedback with your natural resonance. Adjust the field to match these tones." The Metherian's physician looked skeptical but made the adjustments. The patient's form immediately stabilized, and they let out a sound of relief that translated as "the pain is gone." "How did you know?" "Because I listened," Sarah said. She moved to the second patient, a Trilaxian whose crystalline eyes had been damaged in an industrial accident. Every regeneration attempt had failed. Sarah examined them with her magnifying glasses and smooth stones. "The damage isn't just physical," she said quietly. "There's scar energy blocking the natural healing process. It's like emotional trauma made manifest in crystal form." She had the patient hold 2 river stones, one in each appendage. "These stones have spent 1,000 years being shaped by water, learning to let go of their rough edges. Hold them. Feel their patience. Let them teach your eyes how to release the trauma and grow again." The Trilaxian physician started to protest, but Sarah raised a hand. "Give it 1 week. If there's no change, you've lost nothing but time." the results that couldn't be ignored. 1 week later, the medical station was in chaos. The Trilaxian's eyes had begun to regenerate, something no technology had achieved. The Matharian's resonance had remained stable for the first time in years. 4 other patients had shown significant improvement. But more than that, something else was happening. Physicians from across the galaxy were raiding their own archives, digging up ancient healing practices that had been set aside in favor of modern technology. They were learning to trust their senses again, to see their patients as more than collections of data points. Dr. Vexith found Sarah in the observation lounge, watching Earth rise over Proxima Tertius. "You've started a revolution," he said quietly. "I've reminded people of something they already knew," Sarah corrected. "Your species has been practicing medicine for millennia, Doctor. Long before you had quantum scanners. Those ancient physicians weren't stupid. They learned to read their patients in ways we've forgotten." She turned to face him. "Technology is wonderful. It saves lives that would have been lost in my grandmother's time. But it's not a replacement for connection, for intuition, for actually being present with your patients. It's supposed to enhance our abilities, not replace them." The offer she almost refused. Ambassador Shimrath had requested a private meeting. When Sarah arrived, she found not just the ambassador and Princess Lelith, but representatives from the Galactic Medical Council. "Dr. Park," the council's chairwoman began, "we would like to offer you the position of Chief of Traditional Medicine at the Federation's Central Hospital. It's one of the highest honors we can bestow." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "That's incredibly generous. But I'm 72 years old. I have maybe 20 good working years left, if I'm lucky. What happens when I'm gone?" "Then we'll have lost a great healer," the chairwoman said. "No," Sarah said firmly. "That's not good enough. If you want my knowledge, if you want these techniques to survive, then we need to create something bigger than me." She pulled out her worn leather bag, setting it on the table. "My grandmother gave me this when I was 18. In it are tools her grandmother gave to her. These techniques have been passed down through my family for generations, but they don't belong just to us. They belong to anyone willing to learn." Sarah looked around the room. "I'll accept your offer on one condition: we create a new medical discipline, one that teaches physicians from every species how to reconnect with their traditional healing practices. We document the ancient techniques before they're lost forever. We train a generation of healers who understand that modern technology and ancient wisdom aren't enemies. They're partners. The academy that bridged two worlds." 2 years later, the Galactic Academy of Integrative Medicine opened its doors. It occupied an entire moon in neutral space, built to accommodate physicians from every known species. Dr. Sarah Park served as its first director, though she insisted on the title head teacher instead. The curriculum was revolutionary. Students spent half their time learning the most advanced medical technology in the galaxy. The other half was spent with their hands in river water, learning to feel subtle differences in stone. They studied quantum biology in the morning and practiced listening to their patients' natural rhythms in the afternoon. Sarah's teaching methods were demanding. On her first day, she stood before 300 students from 90 species and said, "Everyone put away your scanners and computers. We're going outside to collect rocks." The students thought she was joking. She wasn't. The moment of legacy. On the Academy's 5th anniversary, Sarah stood in the Hall of Healers, surrounded by students who had graduated and gone on to revolutionize medicine across the galaxy. Princess Lelith, now a qualified physician herself, stood beside her. "You saved my life," Lelith said quietly, her crystalline form blazing with health. "But more than that, you showed an entire galaxy that there's value in the old ways." Sarah smiled, her weathered hands resting on the railing. "I didn't save your life, sweetheart. Your father did, by being willing to amplify your natural frequency. Dr. Vexith did, by being humble enough to ask for help. You did, by fighting to heal. I just reminded everyone how to listen." She looked out at the academy, where students from species that had never even met were learning together, sharing their ancient healing traditions, building something new from old foundations. My grandmother used to say that the universe speaks in frequencies we've forgotten how to hear. She said our job as healers isn't to force the body into health, but to help it remember what health feels like. Sarah's eyes grew distant. I spent 50 years listening to rocks, and everyone thought I was wasting my life. Turns out, those rocks were teaching me how to save a princess. The message to Earth. That night, Sarah recorded a message to send back to Earth. It would take weeks to arrive, bouncing through communication relays across light years of space. To my granddaughter Emma, she began, her voice soft. By the time you get this, you'll probably have seen the news about what happened here. I want you to know something important. I didn't do anything special. I just used what Grandma Chen taught me, what her mother taught her, going back generations of women in our family who knew how to listen to the earth. She held up the leather bag, worn smooth by decades of use. This bag is waiting for you. In it are the tools, the notebooks with hand-drawn diagrams, the river stones we collected together. But more than that, it contains a way of seeing the world that refuses to choose between ancient wisdom and modern knowledge. It understands that both have value. Sarah's voice grew stronger. Emma, they're calling me a revolutionary here. But I'm not. I'm just a grandmother who remembered what her grandmother taught her. That's the revolution right there, remembering that the old ways still work, that our ancestors weren't foolish, that sometimes the answer to a complex problem is beautifully simple. She paused, collecting her thoughts. I'm getting old, sweetheart. This work will outlive me, but it needs people like you to carry it forward. People who aren't afraid to look silly holding river stones in a room full of quantum scanners. People who trust their hands as much as their technology. The final lesson. Dr. Vexith found Sarah in her office late one night, handwriting notes in her paper journal by lamplight. You have access to quantum computers that could record your thoughts faster than you can think them, he said, amused. Why do you insist on writing by hand? Sarah set down her pen. Because, doctor, when I write by hand, I have to slow down. I have to think about each word, feel the pen moving across paper. It connects my thoughts to my body in a way that typing into a computer doesn't. She smiled. It's the same principle as everything else I've taught. Connection matters. Presence matters. Slowing down enough to actually experience what you're doing matters. She closed the journal. In 6 months, I'm going back to Earth. This academy is thriving, and it doesn't need an old woman holding its hand anymore. But before I go, I want to teach you one final lesson. What's that? Vexith asked. How to be satisfied with what you've built. Sarah stood, moving to the window where stars scattered across the infinite black. You've spent 3 centuries perfecting your craft, saving countless lives. But when Princess Lilith was dying, you couldn't let go of your certainty long enough to try something new. That almost cost a young woman her life. She turned to face him. The greatest physicians aren't the ones who never fail. They're the ones who can admit when they don't know something and ask for help. They're the ones who can hold advanced technology in one hand and ancient wisdom in the other and understand that both have value. The promise for tomorrow. 6 months later, Sarah Park boarded the transport home to Earth. The entire academy turned out to see her off. Princess Lilith presented her with a gift, a crystalline tuning fork that would never age, never break, perfectly calibrated to the frequency of human healing. So your granddaughter will have the best tools, Lilith said, her voice thick with emotion. And so every time she uses it, she'll remember that an old woman with river stones saved an empire's princess. As the transport lifted away from the academy, Sarah looked back at what she'd built. A place where species that had once considered each other primitive or too advanced to understand now taught each other, learned from each other, healed together. Her grandmother had taught her to listen to stones. Sarah had taught a galaxy to listen to each other. And somewhere in that vast exchange of knowledge, from the ancient to the cutting edge, from the simple to the complex, a new kind of medicine was being born. One that understood that the human habit of holding on to old wisdom while reaching for new knowledge wasn't primitive. It was exactly what the universe needed. On Earth, a young woman named Emma Park received a worn leather bag and a crystalline tuning fork. Inside the bag was a note in her grandmother's handwriting: "Every generation thinks they need to start from zero. But the strongest buildings are built on old foundations. Listen to the stones. Listen to the stars. Listen to what your hands know that your eyes have forgotten. And teach others to do the same." The revolution continued, one river stone at a time.